In this lesson, I'm going to teach you how to identify specific characteristics of a polynomial function. And these characteristics include the degree, leading coefficient, and the constant terms. So let's get started with my first polynomial here. F of x is equal to negative x to the power of 5 plus root 5x to the power of 6 plus 4x cubed plus 2. So let's start by identifying the degree. The degree of a polynomial function is the highest power of the variable. So the variable that we're working with here is the x. So let's go through each term one by one and identify the power of the variable. The first term has a power of 5. The second term has a power of 6. The third term has a power of 3. And the last term doesn't actually have an x. So there is no power for the variable in that case. So therefore, the highest power of the variable belongs to the second term, which has a degree of 6. Okay, so on to the leading coefficient. As you know already, the leading coefficient is the number in front of the variable of each term. So let's take a look at each of our terms here and identify the coefficients. The first term has a coefficient of -1. The second term has a coefficient of root 5. The third term has a coefficient of 4. And lastly, this has a coefficient of just 2. So the leading coefficient is the coefficient of the highest power of x. So we already identified the highest power of x belonged to this term, and the coefficient of the second term was root 5. So therefore the leading coefficient is simply a root 5. Okay, so lastly, we want to identify what the constant term is. And the constant term is quite simple. You're looking at the term that has no variable attached to it. That would be your constant term. So taking a look at each of our terms here, the only term that has no x is this one right here, which is a positive 2. So that is my constant term. So the constant term is positive 2, the leading coefficient is root 5, and finally the degree is a positive 6. Okay, so on to the second example. I am given a function f of x is equal to -2 times x plus 4 squared times x minus 2 cubed. Now you may already notice that this polynomial looks very different from the first example, and it looks different because it's actually given to you in factored form. You could still identify each of these three characteristics even if the polynomial is in factored form. And I'm going to show you how to do that right now. Okay, so let's start with the degree. The degree of the function in factored form comes from the power of each of your binomial factors. So if I take a look at my function here, the binomial factors are x plus 4 and x minus 2. And the powers relate to the exponents. So therefore, the degree of this factored form is simply found by adding all the powers of your binomial factors. So 2 plus 3 gives me a degree of 5. Okay, so on to the leading coefficient. The leading coefficient is the number placed in front of your factors or binomial factors. So here, once again, are my binomial factors. The number in front is the -2. So that is my leading coefficient. Okay, so lastly, we want to identify what the constant is. Now, the constant is not very obvious when it's in factored form, but you can still find it by calculating a simple evaluation. To find the constant of a factored polynomial, simply evaluate where x is equal to 0. That will give you your constant. So if I let x equals to 0, I have -2 times x, 0 plus 4 squared times 0 minus 1/2 cubed. So let's keep going with our evaluation here. F of 0 is equal to -2 times 4 squared, which gives me a 16, and -1/2 cubed, which gives me a 1/8. -1/8, sorry. So if I multiply each of these three numbers here, I get a value of positive 4. And that positive 4 is the constant of my polynomial. And that is how you identify the degree, the leading coefficient, and the constant term of a polynomial function.